Welcome to Northshore. Those of you who are new, I'm Wolfgang. I work here, and it's good to see you. This summer, there will be hundreds of thousands of people who will take the pilgrimage down south to Orlando, Florida, where they will visit the the happiest place on earth and have a fantastic time escaping the pressures and worries and stresses of their everyday lives to instead enjoy the pressures and stresses of worries of lines in places like Fantasyland and Adventureland and Tomorrowland. And I love amusement parks. The nerd in me cannot wait to try the blue milk at the new Star Wars place. I can't wait to do that. But anyway, I was recently reading a little bit about how some of this came to pass. And many of you know, after Walt Disney had already built this massive movie-making studio and then had the incredible success there in Anaheim with Disney, the original Disneyland, he set out for an even more ambitious project. By this point in his life, he had several grandkids, and one of his biggest concerns for them was what kind of world were they going to grow up in? So how could he help build an environment where they would be shielded or protected from some of the worries and dangers of modern life? He set out to build this perfect utopian world that would be walled off from all the ugly stuff out there. And so over a period of time, he bought almost 50 square miles of swampland between Kissimmee and Orlando, Florida. By some comparison, that's more than half the land area that the city of Seattle occupies. And his plan was to build more than just an amusement park. It was to build an entire different kind of community and city. And he wanted to call it Epcot. That's where that came from. It stood for the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow, because he imagined there would need to be more of these as our world got rougher and rougher. Now, others in the company didn't really care for the whole Epcot name. Eventually, of course, the park itself became known as Walt Disney World, and just a little portion of it is referred to as Epcot. But even though it didn't exactly come as he dreamed, the idea never totally died. And a few years later, they built, just outside the park, an area called Celebration City, a place where people could buy homes and live in a perfectly manicured, perfectly controlled, perfectly beautifully designed little community that would sort of shield them, isolate them from the ugliness of the world around them. Some of you are wondering, are there any lots for sale, right? Because I think I'd like that. And let's be honest, for many people, that's the goal of their life. It's to maybe not have the resources Disney has to build a city of their own, but certainly at their own scale to try to create a living arrangement where they are as isolated and protected and shielded from the ugliness all around us. To be on the hunt for what will make them happy. Just yesterday, I was down in Totem Lake and stopped in to grab some lunch there and quickly ran into Northshore Rack, the relatively new Northshore Rack that's down there. And as I was riding up the escalator, I was looking for some sunglasses because, suddenly it's sunny. And as I was riding up the escalator, I saw written in giant letters on the wall to my left this message: happiness, find it here. These words are almost as big as me, right? And as you're shopping, they kind of serve the background for your shopping experience. That's right, happiness is just one purchase away. It's in Totem Lake. Did you know? You've been searching and searching. It's in the shoe section. That's where it is, right? Now, I did find some glasses, and fortunately, they were 80% off whatever their original ridiculous price was, and I'm very happy with them, very happy with them. But you know as well as I do, it's just a matter of time until I break or lose them, just like the last pair of sunglasses that I had. And this is the cycle. And the question we're asking in this series is this the best we can do? Temporary things, little bumps of happiness that never seem to last? Interestingly, that's what happened in Celebration City, Florida. Before you call your realtor, you ought to know that just a few years ago, the residents of the community pulled together. They sued the company who'd been neglecting the property to the point where leaky walls, literally balconies falling off the sides of buildings, and as a result, there was a $20 million judgment for repairs. Well, in this series, we're trying to go deeper than that. Because many of us, we've tried a lot of things that were wonderful. Until they weren't. I've tried many things. They were wonderful. Until they weren't. And so we've resolved, and we're challenging each other to go deep. We are not happy with happy. We want to go deeper. We want something more than just another purchase or another vacation or another relationship or another success. We want joy. And we acknowledge it will not happen by accident. And so we're being very intentional about talking about what this joy life looks like and asking ourselves how to actually live it. And to help you, some of you know we've put out a little text thing through this series. It's free, of course, but you can text JOYFUL to 97000, and a couple times throughout the week, you'll get little prompts or challenges or thoughts to help you as you're training yourself in this ability, this skill of joy. Now, here's something I'm learning, and this goes against the grain of what most people want to hear when it comes to spiritual life and spirituality. Most people believe that the most joyful people in our world are the ones who have experienced the least difficulty. But you know what I found? It's exactly the opposite. The most joyful people I know are the ones who many times have experienced the most difficulty in their lives. Because here's the dirty little secret. Life is difficult. Things go wrong, problems come. Jesus said himself, in this world, you might have trouble. No. He said, you will have trouble. Things happen. You can't avoid it. But if you want to experience joy, you're going to have to begin to look at difficulty differently. That's the next step in this joy-filled journey that we're on. I'll just tell you it right now up front. You can write it down if you want, or you can try to remember it. Joy-filled people look at difficulty differently. They look at it differently. You see, there's a lid on all of our lives. And that lid is whatever degree of difficulty and pain you can endure. If you can handle this much difficulty, then you'll experience this much of God, this much joy. If you can handle this much difficulty, you'll experience this much of God. If you can experience this much difficulty, then you will experience this much of God and joy. Where's your lid? Where's your lid? There are people in the Bible who we think of as heroes of the faith. They're heroes because every single one of them dealt with difficulty. When difficulty came, they didn't freak out, say, oh no, what's happening? What's happening? They recognized this is something, with God's help, I need to get through. It's interesting, even people in the world, business world, professional world, this wisdom that we're going to be looking at here in Philippians, they're talking about it as well. There's a book that's been popular in the last couple of years. Some of you have maybe read it or seen it or heard of it. It's called Grit by a professor named Angela Duckworth. It gained prominence, especially around here, because Coach Pete Carroll, there with the Seahawks, he saw her TED Talk on this subject, he read her book, and he invited her to come and speak to his team. The TED Talk she delivered about grit has been viewed 17.5 million times. And the whole idea is what separates normal performers from those who excel is what she calls grit. This ability to overcome obstacles, to hang on in hard times, to endure through difficulty. See, the lid on your life, the lid on your joy will always be the degree of difficulty you can handle. And long before Angela Duckworth wrote her book or did her TED Talk or Pete Carroll invited her to speak to the team, the Apostle Paul, he was challenging his friends with the very same ideas, only going so much deeper. So much deeper. And in the section we're looking at today, in Philippians chapter 1, starting in verse 12, Paul begins to talk through some of the difficulties he's faced, some of the stuff that's tested his grit. And they're difficulties that you will deal with and I will deal with in life as well. And when we face them, we have a choice. Will we throw in the towel and give up and say, this is hard, I don't want to do it anymore? Or will we say, Lord, I'm not exactly sure how this will work, but I will choose joy, like the song talked about. Whatever the headlines are, whatever the circumstances are, I will choose joy. So here's the first difficulty that we see sort of joy robbers, if you'll think of them that way. Things that will sneak in as thieves and steal your joy. Here's the first. The first joy robber, difficult circumstances. Difficult circumstances. All of us know difficult circumstances. I was just talking with a member of our staff, and prior to having worked here, one of his early jobs, he worked for the airlines, and part of his job was to offload the waste on airliners when they would land on the ground. So he'd drive up with a truck with a hose, he'd go up to that port on the back that attached to the septic tank in the airline. He would attach that, and he'd open it up and let all that nastiness kind of drain out of there, all right? He said one of the things he learned early in the job was when you go up to that valve, to make sure you open it like this and not like this. Because he said, either as a joke or some turbulence in the air, whatever, those valves have a way of coming loose. And he said there was nothing as disgusting as watching somebody come walking into the break room dripping with blue juice. He had other names for it too. Arizona green tea was one of his names, I think. Denver Nuggets. It depended on where the plane came from, I suppose. The junior higher in me thought that was so funny I had to include it. But anyway. Here's my point. Every one of us in this room knows the feeling of getting a face full of blue juice. Not literally. I'm talking metaphorically here, all right? Are we tracking together? Are you with me? You with me? We know what it's like to have difficulty hit us in the face. Nasty, ugly, hard things in our lives. Paul certainly knew all about that. This book about joy, he didn't write it sitting on a beach somewhere with an umbrella drink in his hand working on his tan. He wrote this book about joy, chained to a Roman soldier, not knowing whether or not he was going to live or die, if he'd be sentenced to death or released. Those are the kinds of difficult circumstances he faced over and over and over in his life. In another letter, he writes specifically about some of what he'd endured. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, he says, 5 times, Paul writes, I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. This is not most people's bucket list, all right? But this was Paul's experience. He had been through difficult circumstances, and he was writing this in the middle of difficult circumstances. So look at what he writes, starting in verse 12, Philippians chapter 1. He says, now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. See, we talked about this last week. Paul's focus is on forever. And so he's not as worried about what happens right now. What he's concerned with, what's going to matter 100 years from now? What will matter in 100 years is not how uncomfortable this shackle was or how cold this cell was. What will matter at that moment is, did I hold on to faith? Did I help other people hear about this Jesus? How did my life impact the lives of those around them? Did I serve as an example? Did I serve as an inspiration? Or did I serve as one more excuse? He couldn't do it. I guess it can't be done. Now, I know there are people in this room who are going through some hard stuff. You know the feeling of getting a face full of blue juice. Maybe in your physical health, or in your relationships, your financial life. Things are not working out as you always thought they would. And Paul, of course, he had dreams. He had a way he pictured things. He always wanted to go to Rome. It was the most important city of the day. And you can be sure he imagined standing up in the marketplace and teaching to large crowds, seeing many people come and respond to this good news of Jesus. But that's not how he wound up there. He wound up there as a prisoner, in chains. The only audience he had was literally a captive one. The guard next to him, the others in the prison. It's not how he imagined it, but he kept going. The lid on his life, the joy in his life, it kept growing, and he held on. And he can write words like this of how even the terrible stuff in his life was still going to be used to make a difference. Maybe right now in your life, there's stuff happening that is not what you imagined. Maybe, for instance, you're married and things have been hard. You wish you were single. Or maybe you're here and you're single and you don't want to be. You wish you were married. Could it be that maybe, instead of giving up or throwing in the towel, quitting as so many would be prone to do, what if you were to say, Lord, I'm going to go through this. I'm going to choose joy in this so that I can help other people see what it looks like for a Christian to endure family or relationship challenges in my life. As hard as it is, in the middle of this difficulty, what if you kept going, and by doing that, you showed somebody else that this joy is real, that this faith is real, that this Jesus is real? So someone you know will see this is how a follower of Jesus gets through difficult times. What if they see that and they say, wait a minute, that is not normal? Most people would have caved. What is it that keeps you going? It's the people who have held on like that I've seen the joy lid grow and grow and grow. Now, I'm not minimizing your struggle. Please don't mishear me. There's hard stuff, and we're here to help. But let me just be blunt. No matter what struggle you're facing today, it will not matter 100 years from now. But here's something that could matter 100 years from now. Did I show godly grit and hold on? Or did I give up? Did I point other people to Jesus? Or did I become one more story of somebody who tried it, thought it was too hard, and quit? I'll make a choice. This is not easy. Listen, if you want easy, the joy life is not available to you. It's just not. See, my joy will not be determined by what's happening to me. My joy will be determined by what Jesus is doing in me and through me. He's growing me. He's using me. He's taking me deeper. I want that lid to grow, just like it had grown in Paul's life. He talks about another joy robber, and this one I know we all deal with. It's the joy robber of difficult people. Do you know any difficult people? Don't point at them. I didn't say point at them. I just asked if you know any. Paul knew some difficult people. Listen to what he writes, verse 15. It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. Anybody here ever had anyone try to stir up trouble for them? I have. Someone who spread gossip about you in the cafeteria, maybe? Someone who questioned your motives when all you were trying to do was something good to help somebody? Someone who tried to pull you down to try to make themselves look a little better? Paul says, I know all about that. But look how he responds. Verse 18. He says, but what does it matter? So what? The important thing is in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I will rejoice. Yes, I continue to rejoice. There's a choice he makes. Paul says, there are people who will do things or will not do things the way you think they should be done. Don't let that steal your joy. So what, he says, I will keep my eyes focused on the work Jesus has for me. That matters more than people's motives or their actions. One time, almost 20 years ago now, I was part of a speaking team that was in Calcutta, India, doing work at some universities throughout the country. And part of our visit to Calcutta, we had an afternoon where we had a chance to go visit Mother Teresa's headquarters. It was just after she had died. But still, there were many there who had worked with her, and they toured us around the impressive work and mother house and so forth. And I'll never forget, as we were walking through one of the children's houses, there was a plaque, a sign that was on the wall that caught my eye, and I found a pencil somewhere and scribbled it down real quickly. I've never forgotten this. It stuck with me all these years. It's titled, Do It Anyway. Some of you maybe have heard this before. Here's what that said. It said, people are often unreasonable, irrational, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some unfaithful friends and some genuine enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and sincere, people may deceive you. Be honest and sincere anyway. What you spend years creating, others could destroy overnight. Create anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, some may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today will often be forgotten. Do good anyway. Give the best you have, and it will never be enough. Give your best anyway. In the final analysis, it is between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway. Friends, if you live your life focused on the reactions or actions of other people, if your joy is dependent on their attitudes or their responses or their approval, let me tell you, your joy will be a fragile thing. It will be easily exposed to theft. See, in the final analysis, it is between you and God. It is never between you and them anyway. People have impure motives, Paul says, so what? This isn't about me. This is about God. He'll sort that stuff out. All that matters is if I continue moving forward, I will remain focused on that. So I will not allow my joy to be stolen by difficult circumstances. I will not allow my joy to be stolen by difficult people. And finally, I will not allow my joy to be stolen even in the face of the greatest difficulty every human deals with: death itself. Death itself. Listen to what he says. These shocking, almost unbelievable words, beginning the second half of verse 18. He says, yes, I will continue to rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage to hold on, the guts, the grit, so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. See, he's facing potential sentence of death in this situation. And then he writes this, one of the most famous sentences in the Bible. Here's what Paul says: for to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. In that one little sentence, Paul sums up his entire life. Let me ask you, if you summed up your whole life in one sentence, what would it be? See, Paul's whole life since he'd met him was about Jesus. It wasn't about the comfort of his life, his status, his accomplishments, his standing with others. It was all about helping other people know Jesus, to discover that they are known and loved by the God of the universe. And this God, in love, reached down not to swat, but to hold, to invite, to offer a fresh start to broken, ordinary people like me, a new life to anyone who would ask, who would open themselves up and admit their need for him. His life became about helping everybody he met know that, whether it was his friends at that church or whether it was the guard chained to his arm. That's what his life was about. And because of that, he could even face death with joy. And I know it might sound strange in a series on joy that we would talk about death, but it's the ultimate thief, isn't it? And it's at the heart of Paul's joy, his confidence. It's not at all that Paul had some kind of death wish or that he was suicidal. Many people deal with that. And again, we want to help. We're here to help. But that's not at all what Paul's talking about here. Paul's saying this is the ultimate win-win. You know what a win-win is, right? It's when there's no bad option. Things work out perfectly, whichever things play out. If I continue living, Paul says, I get to continue to be part of this incredible work of watching Jesus change lives. I get to see more and more people who at one time were confused or lonely or addicted or discouraged. I get to help them see they have purpose. They are not an accident. They are loved. They can find connection and freedom thanks to Jesus. And there is nothing like that. Nothing like that. So for me, to live is Christ. His love, His joy, His mission, His presence, His growth in my life. I want to go even deeper, Paul says. But to die, well, it's a win-win. Because in that moment, if I die, I get to see this one who loved me. This faith that has sustained me all these years, I will no longer need, because my faith will now become sight. I'll see firsthand this one who forgave me, who's never abandoned me, never broken a promise to me. I get to see him face to face. I'm finally home, he says. Because friends, we all face difficult circumstances. They may be different, but we all know that blue juice feeling. And we all deal with difficult people from time to time. Some are worse than others. And if you don't have any difficult people, we keep a list here at the church. We can give you some if you'd like to take them with you. Because we all deal with it. But there is one thing every single one of us will deal with one day. And we've said this before, not to be flip, but the latest research is in, and the death rate continues to hover right at 100%. It's something all of us are going to face someday if Jesus doesn't come sooner. And there's a lot here that could be said. In fact, we spent 5 weeks in a series called Afterlife, What Happens When You Die. It's now been about 2 years ago. But if you go to our website, the videos of all of those talks are under the message section on northshore.church. And they may be worth you spending some time if you want to dig deeper on some of these things. We talked about important things like heaven, because the Bible has a lot to say about heaven. And we talked about hell, because the Bible has a lot to say about hell. In fact, Jesus talked more about hell than he ever talked about heaven. And big topics, so check those out in our archives. But here's the bottom line. The Bible teaches that we are more than just bodies. We have souls. There's a part of us that is designed to last forever, and it will. And our souls will either be fully present with God as they were meant to be when we die. The Bible calls that heaven. Or we will be completely separated from God's presence, which the Bible calls hell. And what determines the destiny of our souls, what determines our forever, is not how good or bad we are. It's not how often we've prayed or sat in a room like this. It's whether we have embraced this good news that Paul was so obsessed with sharing to other people. You may not believe this. And I know in our world, some of this is hard to swallow, especially if this is all new for you. But I can only tell you what Paul said was at the core of his joy. I can only tell you what I've found is the kind of durable source of real joy. But you'll have to decide for yourself. In a letter Paul wrote to the Christians in another city in Rome, where he was writing this letter, but this was written earlier. Romans 6:23, well-known verse. He said, "The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord." Our hope for eternity is not based on our pastor or our family. Our hope for forever is Jesus. Because Paul's life was based on his faith in Christ, his die was gain. But friends, hear me clearly. It is not gain for everybody. Because if we ignore this good news, if we decide to live on our own terms and try to make the cut based on our own goodness, hoping the good things in our life will outweigh the bad, the Bible does not paint a positive picture of where that leads. And I know this is a heavy thing to say, but I'll just put it very directly like this. For those who choose to live on their own, who do not embrace Jesus and his grace, this world is as good as it's ever going to get. But for those who place their trust in Jesus, who admit their need for him and open their heart, this world, it's as bad as it's ever going to get. That's the good news. That's what the word gospel means, good news. And I'm not trying to scare you or manipulate you. That's simply what this book says. It's simply what Jesus clearly taught. It's the message that Paul shared with so many people. He had absolute confidence that on the other side of death, he would finally see Jesus. And it was that daily confidence that gave him an invincible joy that overcame difficult circumstances, difficult people, and even the difficulty of death. Let me finish by telling you a story. For many years, I was a pastor in Las Vegas. And during those years, I, for part of the time, worked with a woman named Diane. I've had some amazing assistants over the course of my ministry, and Diane was one of the best. She was my parents' age, but she had lived a life unlike anyone else I had ever known. Diane had been a showgirl on the Las Vegas Strip through the 1950s and 60s. She had pictures with everyone from Nat King Cole to Ella Fitzgerald to Duke Ellington. If you don't know who those people are, you should. All right? Go find out. She'd perform with Frank Sinatra many times. Friends with these guys. And this was years before I knew her, but she still carried herself with this elegance, with this grace. Anyway, we worked together for several years, and I remember the day she came into my office with her eyes red and told me that she'd had a doctor's appointment where he'd told her that she had a very aggressive form of cancer and they had to start chemotherapy very, very soon, right away. So they got her checked into the hospital, and before they started treatment, she called and asked the day before if I'd come and see her. And it was going to be rough, and she wanted to talk. And I'll never forget this conversation, just a half hour or so. And I asked her how she was doing. She told me she was tired, how the disease was impacting her. I asked her deeper, but how are you really doing? And she admitted she was a little scared. They didn't know how this treatment was going to go. The doctors weren't sure how she'd respond, if it would even help at all. And I said, well, then what if, Diane? How are you doing in your soul? And she turned and looked at me. I'll never forget it. She said, right now, I'll be honest, I can't really feel God with me. But I know he's here. And I'm not afraid. She said, no matter what happens, I'll be okay. If the treatment goes well and I recover, then I get to live on and enjoy life. She loved life. But if it doesn't work and I die, I'll be okay too. I'm not afraid. I'm okay either way. And I'll never forget, the very last thing that she said to me, she said, I think that's what they call a win-win, she said. And it wasn't maybe a week, maybe a little longer, that I stood in that very same hospital room holding hands with her family and singing some of her favorite worship songs as she quietly slipped away. It was 16 years ago, and I can still picture her face. She said, I think that's what they call a win-win. See, friends, what had sustained her in that moment was not all the famous friends she'd had, all the spotlights she'd been under. It was this calm confidence that no matter what happened, because of Jesus, it'd be okay. Do you have that confidence? Because you can. In fact, would you bow your head with me right now? Let me just say, I don't know what kind of sentence would summarize your life. He chased happy until he ran out of time. She was the envy of everyone she knew. Their portfolio was impressive. There's a place for such things. What would it look like to be able to say, to live is Christ? And I'm so confident in that to die is gain. You can have that confidence. And it begins by simply saying, Lord, I admit I've chased happy, whatever the cost, good or bad. And I need your grace. And so I'm opening myself up and I'm asking for your joy, your love, your grit. Because you endured a cross. Talk about grit. You endured a cross out of love for me. And it's because of that I can be confident. I can build my life on a foundation that will not be shaken. It's because of that that you are worthy. And so, Lord, we declare it. You are worthy. And we say thank you. In the name of the one who gives us joy. In the name of the one who is worthy of our lives. Amen.